I was glad that Charles lived in town, but I resolved then and there that whenever I was in my room, I should close the door, and did so at once. Then I retired for the evening, but sleep came fitfully. Turning first this way, then that, I rose once to open my window wider so as to let the breeze in, and finally dozed off into a restless slumber. I don't know what I dreamed, except that I was wakened sometime in the night to the sound of a creaking door. My eyes opened wide, and I lay there, one hand on my pounding heart. "Charles?" The door creaked again. "Who is it?" I called. There was no reply. I reached for my candle, struck a match, and lit it. The room was empty. The door to the hallway was closed, as I had left it, but the door to my closet was open several inches wide. I lay there clutching the bedsheet to my chin in terror, for I was sure I had closed it, especially with mice nesting in as they were inside. I did not blow out the candle, but let it burn the rest of the night, and what sleep there was seemed like no sleep at all. The next morning, with the sun shining full on my curtains, I concluded that perhaps I had not closed the closet door as I had thought, and the breeze coming in the window had blown the door to and fro. Obviously, the nightmares I experienced when my father died, then my mother, were revisiting themselves upon me. There were times I was seized with terror that what had happened to my parents might also happen to me. The slightest sickness would bring with it thoughts of dying, and such morbid thoughts in turn made me fear my mother's madness. Work was the only solution, and since I would not begin at the hat shop until the following week, I went downstairs and announced to Mrs. Hastings that I would like more rigorous work to aid in my sleep, and she cheerfully complied. Fastening a towel around the bristles of a broom, she instructed me to go around the entire house, sweeping down cobwebs from the ceilings. "If that doesn't tire you out, my girl, you can scrub both front and back porches," she laughed. "But I wager you'll scarcely hit the sheets tonight before you're asleep." I set to work at once, sweeping the broom high overhead, running it along the moldings, traveling down the corners and around the gas lamps on the walls. I vowed never to go in Cousin Charles's room until I was certain he was out of the house, but when Mrs. Hastings confided that he had gone to the racetrack, I cleaned the cobwebs from his ceiling also. Being thorough in my work, I did his closet too, and could not help but be impressed at the number and variety of suits I found hanging there, even though he lived in town. Clothes of the best cut and cloth. In short, he owned so much, he could not even keep them all at one place. How he lives and what he owns is no business of mine, I reminded myself, and moved down the hall to the spare bedroom next to the water closet. I knew when I opened it this time I would not be so easily dissuaded from investigating the stairs to the attic. Mrs. Hastings had told me to tackle the cobwebs, but she did not tell me where to stop. So I took this as permission, instruction even, to sweep down the cobwebs in the attic as well. I swept about the walls of the small bedroom with my broom, and when I had seen to that task, turned my attention to the door on one side, opening it slowly, revealing the narrow staircase. Even though it was mid-morning, the passageway was dark, so I got a candle from my room, and holding it in one hand, the broom in the other, I ascended the stairs a step at a time. My lips parted to let out my breath, so rapid had my breathing become. The light from the candle cast huge shadows upon the slanted attic ceiling, and indeed there was little space to work, for the floor was so filled with boxes, trunks, and furniture that I could only take a few steps this way and that. The air was heavy with the smell of dust, old cloth, and paper, and the curtains I had seen at the gable windows from out on the street proved to be yellowed, threadbare things, scarcely more than cobwebs themselves. Up there, the two gable windows struck me as even more fearsome, for they seemed to be eyes looking inward, studying my every move. I held the candle out at arm's length to light the far corners, and satisfied myself that there was nothing out of the ordinary that could not be found in any attic. Nothing moved, save the shadows, and those only because my hand was trembling. And finally, much relieved, I forgot the cobwebs entirely and started down again. Halfway from the bottom, my heart leapt against the wall of my chest, for there was a large, dark shadow on the remaining steps. I stood motionless, fearing that someone might be standing just outside the attic door. But as my breathing returned, and I stepped cautiously upon one of the darkened steps and examined it more closely, I saw that it was not a shadow at all, but a dark stain embedded on the wood. Holding the candle out over the deep mahogany stain, the pounding of my heart told me what my brain had first refused, that it was the color of blood. I had not thought that it was there when I ascended the stairs, yet here it was, sure as the slippers on my feet, and I wondered if my mind were turning against me. I sucked in my breath and leaned against the wall, trying to conquer my terror. Yes, it was blood, most certainly. Here was where the deed was done. I knew it now. I tried to imagine a girl like Jade Green hiding on the attic stairs and taking her life. What could have driven her to do it? A girl as spunky and full of life as she had been, according to the cook. I went swiftly down, and when at last I was in the room below, I closed the attic door behind me and sat on the edge of the spare bed until finally my pulse slowed. The better I knew the house, I was certain, the less I would fear it, no matter what its tales, and the better I would sleep at night. But the blood on the staircase disturbed me greatly. Nonetheless, I worked so hard all day and slept very well that evening, and the next, and the next. When I woke the morning of my first full day in Helene's hat shop, it was as though summer had come overnight to Whispers. Leaves that had only been tight little curls before had now unfolded, and a green world was appearing beyond my bedroom windows. "Oh, Mrs. Hastings," I cried, entering the kitchen. "It's such a beautiful day." "Indeed it is," she replied. "Your uncle took his coffee in the garden this morning before going to work, and I have biscuits and jam waiting for you under the beech tree." In truth, I had been so eager to get out to the hat shop that I had hoped to skip breakfast altogether. But the garden looked inviting, and so I took my place on the wrought iron table out on the grass, and let Mrs. Hastings serve me, as it gave her great pleasure to do so. It did not please me, however, that I was soon joined by Charles, who came around the side of the house and sat across from me. Nor did it escape me that for a man who was living elsewhere, he managed to show up regularly at mealtimes. "Good morning," he said pleasantly, and then, waiting until Mrs. Hastings had served him his coffee and gone back inside, he said, "Tell me, Judith, what was the financial situation of your father at the time of his death? It seems inconceivable to me that he should die penniless as you would have us believe." I could scarce believe his rudeness. "How could you doubt me?" I said. "What have I done to make you ask such a question?" "I had not meant to be rude," he replied. "But as you are now considered family, you may be treated like family, and it's the type of question I would freely ask a sister." Perhaps so, I thought. I could hardly expect to be embraced as family, yet treated still as a guest. "Very well," I said. "My father did not have the business sense of Uncle Geoffrey, and some of his decisions were poor ones. While we did not live in poverty after his death, he owed so many people that Mother and I were forced to sell our most valuable possessions to pay off his debts." "He left you nothing at all? Surely there was family silver, your mother's jewelry, paintings, furnishings?" "All that we had sold, Cousin Charles. Mother and I had moved into a set of rooms in a neighbor's house, and lived very simply. And simply put, I came to you penniless." "Well, that is unfortunate, if true," he said. "Not, of course, that it makes any difference." "Thank you," I said, wishing with all my heart that I could believe him. I took another bite of biscuit, then a sip of tea, and when I looked up again, I was disconcerted, for this time his frown had been replaced by a smile that was no more comforting, and his eyes were not on my face, but on my figure. I felt my cheeks burn and dropped my eyes once again. He laughed and set down his cup. "Well, I see you're off to the gossip shop in your finery," he said. "Tell Violet Morrison that if she waggles her tongue any faster, the thing will fall off." And with that, he left the garden. I will let no one ruin this day, I told myself determinedly, and, gathering up my plate and cup, took them into the house. Indeed, when I started out for the hat shop, the sun warm upon my face, the trees gloriously green, the greens so new, the flowers so fresh, a breeze so light, I began to think that Whispers was the prettiest town on the East Coast. There were several customers inside the shop when I arrived, and before I knew it, I was fetching the ribbon and thread for Helene, going in and out of the back room to get first one color of veiling, then another, and hoped most desperately to get through the day without a mistake. Finally, at lunchtime, Violet and I went next door to the Bib and Bottle for a meat pie to eat on a bench outside. If only I had taken off my slippers as well, I would have been content, for they were pointed at the ends and pinched my toes. "Won't be too many days like this one," Violet said. "It'll be hotter than a stove lid come summer." She took a long drink of her ale and then asked me, "So, what's it like living in the old Sparrow place?" "I like it well enough," I told her. "I have a fine room overlooking the garden, and they ask very little of me. In short, I'm treated as a daughter." "But at night," Violet went on, her eyes fastened on me, "what do you do then?" "Oh, what do you mean? I sleep, of course." "Have you ever seen or heard her?" "Who?" I asked, but in my heart I knew the answer even before she spoke it, and gooseflesh arose on my arms. "Jade Green," she answered. "She's there, they say. If you haven't seen her yet, you will."